Welcome to the Science for Sport podcast, where we dive into stories and insights that drive peak performance. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind the science of success. Here's your host, Richard Graves.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Science for Sport podcast with me, Richard Graves. This week, I'm asking, how do you create a cohesive team environment in order to foster success? Well, this week's guest is a high-performance sports consultant, Tom Clough, who's experienced collegiate sports in America, as well as working in both rugby codes, league and union, back here in the UK. So, let's hear from him now.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Well, Tom, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome along.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Now, I know you've been involved in the field of sports performance in a career that spans just over a decade now. So for those that perhaps aren't familiar with your story, tell them a little bit about your journey along the way.
Yeah, well, my passion has always been in training. Try just a typical story of anyone that's in the performance side in the back office of sport. We were failed sportsmen. We weren't quite good enough, or the dreaded injuries, and then you get an interest. You have a little bit of passion there, and you start to explore that. And I did the same. So I started personal training, a little bit of sports therapy. And then went across to the US to do an internship and really start to study strength and conditioning. That was my route in. Came back and rugby league's my sport of passion that I grew up with and worked for a couple of clubs. Grew through Super League, did a little bit in rugby union as well for the past 6 years, and now I'm back amongst other sports, working back in rugby league as well.
Yeah, I was going to say you've worked in both codes of rugby, but I am interested to know what you learned from your time in America, because, whilst rightly there's a big focus on professional sports with the NBA, the NFL, baseball, hockey, and so on, collegiate football is big, if not a little bit bigger than professional sports over in the States. So what did you take from your time over there?
Well, they just, it was a multi-sport facility that I worked at, prepping for high school athletes or college athletes or professional athletes. And the typical route for those is through the combine events. So there's a real specific focus around athletic development, physical training. So I think what you learn is the passion that the athletes have to really chase that development. But also from a coaching point of view, they're enthusiastic about coaching and the difference that can make in developing young people, and you see the opportunities that brings. So I think to really sample that passion from an athlete point of view and from a coaching point of view, you see what's possible, and there's some great athletes over there, and there's no denying what they're able to achieve.
From a professional viewpoint, does that make you a better, more rounded performance consultant? I
think any experience you have, I think you become more and more rounded the longer that you're in this game, and what you thought you knew is probably not quite right in today's market. And what I know next year is probably, I'll reflect back and think that I'm making mistakes now. So I think it's just part of the journey. I'd probably encourage everyone to go and try different sports, to go try different environments. And, as I'm experiencing in different environments, when you're winning, you learn things, but also when you're losing, you learn a lot faster, and it brings different pressures. And as long as you don't stay in that position too long, then I think you learn from that, and I think you develop as a practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely, without doubt. And across whatever sporting sphere it might be, if you're going to be successful, you need successful leadership. And I noticed on your LinkedIn page a while back, you wrote an article that was headlined, "To lead, you must stay connected." Explain what you mean by that.
Well, I know mistakes that I've made in my journey. I know that you maybe have a perception of what leadership is, or you think, okay, look, I'm going to start here. I'm coaching on the field. I'm coaching on the gym floor, and I may start to oversee different departments, or I start working with different levels within the organisation. And I think if you remove yourself from where the critical mass is, where the centre of the programme is, and you lose that feel and that connection, you start to make decisions which aren't for the which aren't for the betterment of that programme. And you may think that you're having a positive impact, and in some cases you can. But I think that you've got to go back and you've got to stay where your feet are and stay really connected with what the people are experiencing, what the people need, and what the current challenges are within the programme or the opportunities are within the programme. So I think from my experience, I maybe lost that connection and I drifted away from coaching. And I think the more I lead, the more I'm going back and coaching more and more, because it just keeps me as part of the process, and it gives me a good feel for where everything's at. And then I think you can make more informed decisions.
What did you do then to reconnect it, if you like, find your love of sport and the profession you're involved in again to make you that better leader?
Well, I think when you're in those positions and you're not on that field anymore, or you're not on the gym floor anymore, or not as often, you can just sense it in your for the reason that people get involved in the first place. It's for this connection, this journey that you're trying to go on, and then you don't quite feel as part of that team anymore, or you just don't feel like you got your finger on the pulse. So for me, it is being deliberate in terms of finding opportunities to coach, or finding opportunities to be involved within the actual day-to-day process. And when I've done that, I've just felt a stronger bond with the players, stronger bond with the staff, and I think you can influence more change from that position.
Is this where we get the best results then, if you like? Because we often hear this phrase, everybody needs to be singing from the same hymn sheet. I imagine, though, that if you feel a little bit removed, a little bit disconnected, as a team, you can't be speaking the same language. That creates gaps, doesn't it?
Well, a lot of people will talk about diversity, and you'll get diversity through different departments, because everyone's coming from a different point of view. But I think where the real magic is how far you can kind of expand on that spectrum, and how much of a different opinion can you be challenged with and still align in the outcome. So I think that's an environmental challenge, but I think it's something that I think the successful organisations embrace and they work through, and you get people building trust, and they're more and more confident that I used to think that my way was the way, and that I knew best, and then I think you quickly learn that you're not always right, you're not as good as you think you are, and that these different opinions, there's different ways of doing things. And I think as you can work together through that, the more you can expand the differences within the backroom team, playing group or organisation, then the richness comes out in the decision making. And then if everyone can align thereafter, that's where you'll find the fastest growth and the most effective, impactful growth as well.
Well, let's dig a bit deeper into the idea and concept of diversity then, because you often hear that if you have a diverse changing room, diverse range of opinions, that can be a team's greatest strength. Equally, when you see things going wrong with organisations, people will talk about lots of different noises, a diversity of opinion being the biggest weakness. Can they both be right?
Well, they are. They both definitely exist. And I've been involved in both of those. I think, we're coming back to that connection piece, aren't we? I think you've got to find the common ground where you do align really strong on, and the connection that you do, that you build upon. So typically in clubs, that would be the value, it'd be the values that are agreed upon within the organisation or the team. And that might be where everyone actually aligns on the principles of what the values are. But sport test the extremes of everything. It's a big pressure cooker. It really does. So when you're losing, it really tests your principles and your values. And people can go off in different directions, and that's why you got to reconnect and pull everything back and realign on the points that you agreed, or the points that are in the DNA of the organisation or the programme that you're trying to belong to.
This is the whole premise of team spirit, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're strong in that changing room, no matter the obstacles, the adversity that group faces, there's a feeling that you can overcome any challenge.
Well, it's back to that feel. You just know it. You just know it when you're in it. And I think that point of being connected. When you walk into an organisation, you can feel it. You can sense it when you're in there. And even if you're insider coming in, you'll feel where an organisation's at. Whether people are a little bit off here, or whether people are aligned on the same page. There's energy within the environment. There's purpose within what they're doing. So I think you've got to I think you've got to trust your gut quite a lot. But I do think you've got to deliberately create that as well. I don't think it just happens. I think you've got to be comfortable discussing difficult areas as a team. You've got to explore different threads. And that's not easy. It's not easy to facilitate. It's not easy to do from everyone. You've got to encourage people to be honest and be themselves.
How do you go about doing that then in your position? Because, as you say, no two scenarios are the same. There may be different external factors affecting the situation you walk into as well. So in your role as a performance consultant, how do you enable an environment whereby different parts can open up, can discuss their greatest strengths and equally their greatest fears? Because without both, you can't have that strong bond, can you?
I think you've got to give people opportunity in the platform to do it. People to do it in a safe way where they're actually listened to or they're involved in a process. I do think, programs where they're dictated, where you're told what to do, it's back to that, if you tell someone to do it, they'll do it once. If you involve them, if you make them part of it, then it'll happen all the time. So that's what you're trying to do, is really try and involve people in the decision-making process and also the problems that you come up against and discussing what those problems are, what the solutions could be. And then you're coming back to that alignment piece of how you're going to take that on as a team.
I don't want you to give away any trade secrets, but as we touched upon right at the start of this podcast, you've obviously spent time in America. You've worked in both codes in rugby. You spent some time in Ireland with Ulster, as well as previously at Hull KR in Super League, now with the Giants. Across your experience, are there any moments that you can recall, stories that spring to mind about where you think, yeah, that's a moment where I caught lightning in a bottle. That's what we want to achieve.
Specific examples. Yeah, you'd maybe go like change your rooms after a game is where you really get a sense, and that could be after a loss or it could be after a win at certain moments. And you really feel like, everyone's on the same page, or there's real purpose in what we're doing here. But you can find it in winning moments, and you can find it in losing moments as well. So, overcoming adversity, I think, is really like one of the big attractions of sport for me. It's that, people say it's not the top of the mountain, it's the journey up. So I think when you've worked incredibly hard in adverse circumstances, or when the pressure's been on, or people are writing you off, and you overcome that, then that's where the true feeling of accomplishment is. Now that, for different clubs, there's only one team can win at the end of the year. Or, there might be a couple if there's a cup competition or something. But each team can find that win within themselves. It's about understanding what journey you're on. And then, what those moments are, how do they feel, recognise when they do actually occur. I remember being, like over in South Africa with Ulster, the South African teams joined the URC, and teams were struggling to win over there, full stop, because you're at altitude, you're in hot climate, you're humidity, 100% humidity. And we went over there and won 2 games on the bounce over there. I think we won the Lions in Joburg and the Sharks, I think, in Durban. I think, you've got a support staff that are working towards something there because they're trying to strategize how to best prepare the players. All the support that goes around that in dealing with those adverse environmental factors. And then you've got the players that have got to endure it and go out and do it. And I always think, I have 2 team photos from that trip. And I always think they represent everything about sport for me. People being together, overcoming difficult circumstance, and you get that picture at the end, you get that feeling at the end where everyone's together, and we've done it.
How satisfying is that for you then, as part of a coaching setup? Because you touched upon the fact you fell into this profession because you're a frustrated sportsman first and foremost. Everybody sees the players on the pitch. Everybody sees the results, and from that forms their own opinion. But when you're part of a coaching setup and you face a challenge, like you've just mentioned, going to South Africa, altitude, travel, different environment, and you find a way to galvanize and mold a team to overcome all of that and come out on the other side, that you must walk away from that with your chest puffed out and feeling an enormous amount of pride.
I think everyone wants to feel like they're involved in the process and they've had some contribution to success. There's so many factors that go into winning, but I think, if you're any member of that support team, you've met pre-trip, you've planned out what the challenges are going to be, you've discussed solutions. They've come from absolutely everywhere. It could come from the psychologists, nutritionists, coaches, medics, strength and conditioning coaches, players, whatever it may be. You've got a plan, you've executed it. Now, you could have won because of that or in spite of that. But I think if you feel like you've contributed to it and you've deliberately gone about trying to do something, you've found your own win within that, and you found your own connection piece as a staff. If that's our role within that, then I've been part of many good programs where we've lost, and I've been part of many good programs where we've won. The outcome, will be the outcome. I think you've really got to believe in the processes that you do day to day, and you just got to be consistent over time. And I think if you can keep on that same page, you can keep connected through those difficult times. I think the good times come, you do get those experiences.
How many times have you walked away from situations scratching your head for both good and bad, when your team's gone out on one, you've thought, how the heck have we got the win here? And equally, when it hasn't gone your way and seemingly everything has been laid out to enable you to win.
Yeah, I laugh because this is a common conversation. The common one that I have, and I'm sure people will relate if they're involved in competitions or team sport, you'll do a warm-up or you'll train through the week. There you go. Best warm-up. Guys are on it today. I think you get beat by 50 points. Then I've been part of them where you're like, they're quiet today, they're really flat, gosh, we're really flat today. Yeah, we'll see. And then you've won by 50 points. And vice versa, and there's just no real. Sometimes you just scratching your head thinking, I don't know how we did that, or I don't know how that went so wrong.
No rhyme, no reason.
No. Which is why I think you can't be reaction. You can't overreact. When you're good, you can't overreact, and when you're bad, you can't overreact. I think you really have just got to stay in the process and believe in what you're doing.
Isn't that the key, though? Because that's a line we quite often hear. You can't get too high with the highs, can't get too low with the lows. But as a sports fan watching it, you never actually want to hear that. The key for you guys, though, I guess, is making sure that the players that are under you buy into it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, people want to know that you're working hard, that players are really trying and they really care, and I can assure people that they really do, but in terms of how you articulate and show that, sometimes you can't always show that on the pitch or wherever the competition may be, because you've also got another team, organisation that's trying to do the same thing, and that's why people, I think, they get, you see those games where it's a war of attrition and teams are really fighting out, and that's what people are really aligning themselves with. That's what they want to see. But it can't always be that way.
Talk to us a little bit about the role technology's played and evolved, if you like, over the course of your career. Because to this point, we've talked about embracing different facets, psychology, language, but increasingly there seems to be, certainly from the outside looking in on organisations, a greater reliance, a greater dependency on technology. What role does that play in what you do?
Yeah, well, there's so much about now, isn't there? In terms of tracking, training, analysing performance, physical development, stats on the field. It's a bit of a minefield. There's lots going about. I think you've just got to understand why you're using a certain piece of technology, what it's giving you, and then what impact it's actually having on the program. So I see a lot about. I think it's really tempting to kind of take on a new shiny object, but you really have to do a deep dive and say, what impact is this going to have on the program? Who's going to use it? How do they want to use it? What performance needle is it going to have actually move? Because there's many times that when you bring something in, I could bring in an idea, but if I don't involve people in that process of bringing that in, it just stays an idea with me, and it'll probably stay on the shelf. And I'm sure there's many sports teams that have just got technology lying about that they never actually use. So I think it's finding, it's answering the problems that the program has, and then going, could technology help us answer this problem? And then what do we do off the back of it? What decision making do we actually do?
There's no doubt with the advancement of technology, it opens up a whole number of facets that can aid sports performance. But I do wonder sometimes, is potentially one of the biggest pitfalls any coach can fall into having this data, having these analytics available, and not having the right context?
Well, they just give you numbers upon numbers. And there's people that love numbers and there's people that don't love numbers. So it's converting that language, I think, to whatever something gives you. I think it's converting the language into what people understand and to what the key decision makers understand. And that's not always going to be the same for every department, or it's not going to be the same for every person. Every person's view of it is going to be different. So it's just understanding people within your team and converting that kind of language into actionable data. So we think of data and we think of that as being this spreadsheet with lots of numbers or these graphs, but you may need to convert that into just a simple. It might be a simple one number. It might be a statement. You need to convert it into whatever that the person that's going to actually have impact needs, and that's going to be different depending on who you're working with.
So what's your overriding message then? No matter the client that you speak to, the organisation you step into to work alongside, when you go in, what's your overriding message?
What are the problems that you're trying to overcome? And then we just start to look at what the factors may be that influence that performance or that outcome. And then we may be aware of the different technology that exists around that. And we just start to look at, well, what data does it give us? What do people understand about the data? So if I put a set of data or a visual in front of yourself, it should be able to tell you something without me having to tell you what it is. But I'd be interested to know what people do think of different data streams that come out and what it does tell them. I think people interpret them different.
Well, that's absolutely the next question I was going to put to you, whether you're a professional sports coach or coaching at an amateur club. Well, how do you guard against getting false information, if you like? And by that, I mean, everybody can go on any social media platform. You can see any number of videos giving their own advice on how to perform a certain skill. How do you ensure that the information that you've got and are passing on is the right information? That's got to be the key, hasn't it?
Well, you can make it tell you what you want it to tell you as well, can't you? And I think some people are very clever with that. And I think that's where it comes back to that diversity, because you want people to be able to ask different questions of it. So I think if I'm working predominantly in physical development, I'll be biased to look at it from a certain lens. And I've got to stress test my view of how I'm looking at something. So I need someone that's going to ask a different question from a different angle and really challenge, what does that actually mean? And if I can't articulate that, or I don't understand that, or they're exposing something that we've not looked at, but the numbers might be able to tell you, then you can go into that and you can really have that discussion, and you can make some sense of what it's telling you. And if you can make sense of it, then you can start to discuss solutions. I generally believe, clubs have the right practitioners in the room. It's just the language that they all understand to have those good discussions to get the right outcomes to develop for, going forward for what they want to do.
Yeah, it strikes me from what you're saying, if you're able to keep the methodology simple, and again, comes back to what we're saying right at the start, everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, speaking the same language, suddenly the whole process becomes a lot more simplified and easy for everyone to understand.
Yeah, but I don't think people like simple. I honestly don't. I think because it sounds boring. It sounds boring, but I honestly think, I think for me, the biggest thing is honest discussions. Honest, well-informed discussions, as opposed to opinions. I think people give their opinions far too easy, but I think they need to give an opinion, and if it can be backed up by objective data, then I think it becomes a more robust conversation, and that you can actually then start unpacking it and start getting some solutions out of it.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Tom, it's been a fascinating discussion. And for those that have enjoyed this podcast and want to follow your progress, where can they find you?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I don't think I remember my what socials I've got set up. LinkedIn, if you search Tom Clough. I always have to say Tom Clough, Clough, whenever I'm on the phone with someone, or they'll say as in Brian Clough. But if you find me on LinkedIn, I think that's where I put most of my stuff now. I'm about on Instagram as well, but I think that's T Cloughy, IE at the end. But I think LinkedIn's probably the best one, and that's where I'm going to publish more of my thoughts as I
tell you what, given the success Brian Clough enjoyed in his spell at Nottingham Forest, it's not a bad comparison. I wonder what he might have made, though, of all this data analysis and metrics. I'm not sure it was quite his style, was it?
I don't think so, no. I can imagine what he would have said. But as you know, I'm a Leeds fan, so his time at Leeds United, it might have gone a little bit like that.
Well, that's perhaps a whole other conversation to get involved in, because there are thoughts on both sides of that fence, I know for sure. But listen, it's been great talking to you, Tom. Best of luck with the season ahead with the Huddersfield Giants, and we'll watch with interest.
Good man. Thanks, Richard. Thank you.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Many thanks to Tom for sharing his insights and experience on today's podcast. And if you want to find out more surrounding the topic of high performance in sport, you can do so by visiting our website, www.scienceforsport.com. And if you've enjoyed this edition of the Science for Sport podcast, then please do feel free to share it with a coach, a colleague, an athlete, or a friend. Remember, the more downloads we can get, the easier it becomes for us to attract top name athletes and professionals such as Tom at the very top of their industry. Well, that's just about all from me on this week's podcast. I look forward to the next time we can talk again on the next edition of the Science for Sport podcast.
Subscribe to the Science for Sport podcast now, wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more insights, resources, and to join the Academy, visit scienceforsport.com and connect with us on social media by searching for @ScienceForSport. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.